There we go. Finally, the software's working. Now, this is 3 times in a row with the live stream software. I guess this is the new normal for me. Thankfully, the channel has not been shut down yet, and all my videos have not been demonetized yet. But the oil market and the natural gas markets may be the only 2 markets with even halfway decent or realistic or reasonable price discovery now when it's looking at the Chinese economy and the coronavirus. Let me talk about why that is in a little bit, but first, let's just talk about the stock markets. They're juiced. What's even more juiced is the fact that with all these travel bans, with airlines shutting down, airlines losing business, people canceling flights, all these other stories and data points we're seeing about travel to mainland China being shut down by a lot of different airlines voluntarily, borders being closed. In spite of this, the airline stocks, guess what? The airline stocks actually rallied. You can't make this stuff up. So the airline ETF, which is the best pure play here in the US, US Global Jets ETF, really easy to remember, JETS, 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 Jets. No, I'm not a Jets fan, thank God. Sorry, Jets fans. I know there's a lot of Jets fans out there. You do at least have a good young quarterback. Anyway, that was a joke. He is a good quarterback, but I don't want to make any jokes about Jets fans. Anyway, so these airline stocks are actually going up. The U.S. stock market actually going up in spite of all these travel bans, in spite of these airlines canceling flights. That's a lot of money lost. That's a lot of ticket cancellations. The airline stocks are going up anyway. You cannot make this stuff up. It is unbelievable the amount of juice that it has to be coordinated global central bank efforts at this point. Governments, there has to be secret phone calls at this point. Secret plunge protection team meetings between multiple governments. And there's so much juice in the stock markets now, and even the airline stocks. This is more juice than the 1980s and 1990s baseball. God, I screwed up that joke. 1980s and 1990s baseball players were taking. And I'm a baseball fan, but that was a lot of juice back then. The owners and everyone knew about the steroids, and no one cared as long as there were home runs and fans in the stands. The amount of juice in here is nuts. Someone needs to make a funny economic cartoon about like central bankers sticking the steroid needle in like the everything bubble, the global economy. Anyways, let me get back to the oil market. So, we've already had some OPEC cuts. There's talk of an even larger OPEC cut coming. I think over 1 million barrels per day cuts, up to 1 million barrels per day. February 5th. Let me see here. Here we go. February 5th. OPEC Plus committee struggles for consensus on emergency meeting, extends talks for a 3rd day. Technical committee of OPEC has added a 3rd day of meetings after it failed to reach a recommendation on emergency meeting of oil ministers. The committee is expected to run scenarios on oil production and recommend whether ministers should seek a larger cut to production to stop the sharp plunge in oil prices. Oil is down sharply from this year's high, falling into a bear market last week from its 2020 high. Russia could be holding up a decision on OPEC Plus on whether OPEC Plus will make emergency production cuts. Analysts said Moscow's apparent reluctance to make further production cuts seems to have delayed a technical committee's recommendation to OPEC Plus on whether to hold an emergency meeting. The technical committee, which consists of country representatives from OPEC and Russia, extended its 2 days of meetings into Thursday in an effort to find a consensus. So here you are the oil price has actually rallied a little bit. So it was below 50. It was at 49. But the prices for oil and natural gas, let me give you some perspective here. So on Friday, January 10th, natural gas was up to 2.202. I forget the exact measurement for natural gas, but it's collapsed in just the last little bit less than a month. It got as low as 1.81. So that's a collapse, enormous collapse. Remember, China has said in the last week or so that they're canceling LNG contracts because there's not the demand for that. And the oil price, whether it's Brent crude or WTI, is down enormously since the beginning of January. Now, not all of this is China and the coronavirus. Some of it was the risk premium that was put into the airstrike that President Trump put in Iraq on General Soleimani from Iran. And there was rising geopolitical tensions, and those things temporarily calmed down at least a little bit. although there was, another embassy that was attacked in Baghdad, and that didn't affect the oil price at all. But I think the oil market and the natural gas markets are the only two markets right now that seem to be pricing in any type of price discovery for what's really happening with the Chinese economy and the coronavirus. And let's go to this article. So there's a number. Let's go to the article you see on the screen. So this was from a couple days ago. China oil demand has plunged 20% because of the virus lockdown. Chinese oil demand has dropped by about 3 million barrels per day, or 20% of total consumption, as the coronavirus squeezes the economy, according to people with inside knowledge of the country's energy industry. The drop is probably the largest demand shock the oil market has suffered since the global financial crisis of 2008 to 2009, and the most sudden since the September 11th attacks. It could force the hand of OPEC and its allies, which are considering an emergency meeting, to cut production and staunch the decline in prices. It is truly a black swan event for the oil market, said John Kilduff, a partner at Again Capital, LLC in New York. It's a shitty business name, but anyway. There's so many, if you're not aware, there's so many of these hedge funds that have taken out weird LLCs that I guess they're running out of names. There was some hope for the demand outlook this year before the coronavirus outbreak, but that has been knocked off its block. OPEC Plus has to react. If there are no further production cuts, there will be more price losses. Also, what should be added here is the production growth that is still ongoing with U.S. shale oil. Crude futures fell one-year lows on Monday as traders reacted to the magnitude of the health crisis in China. So I think the oil market and the natural gas markets are the only two markets. And obviously you have OPEC, which is a cartel intervening in the oil market, and you have subsidized U.S. economic shale production, which is not economic, a lot of it, subsidized by dumb investors and bankers subsidizing it. Dumb pension fund money. And that's created an oversupply, at least here in the U.S. And so the oil market is not exactly a free market, but it's probably the only market right now with accurate price discovery where central bankers aren't juicing it like crazy. So it is juicing it like crazy to offset reality. You have airline stocks rising. Why are airline stocks rising when they're losing all this business, when there's all these travel bans? It does not make any sense whatsoever. Welcome to dystopia. Okay, back to the article. China is the world's largest oil importer, surpassing U.S. in 2016. So any change in consumption in China has an outsized impact on the global energy market. The country consumes about 14 million barrels per day of oil, equivalent to the combined needs of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, Japan, and South Korea. Chinese and Western oil executives, this is interesting, speaking on condition of anonymity because they aren't authorized to discuss the matter publicly, said the decline was measured against normal levels for this time of year. It's a measure of the current drop in demand rather than the average loss since the crisis started, which would be smaller. Beijing has locked millions of people in quarantine, and the New Year holiday has been extended. Flights have been canceled, and authorities across the globe are trying to contain the virus's spread. Traditionally, during the Chinese New Year holiday, gasoline and jet fuel demand increase as hundreds of millions go back home, while gas oil, that's weird, that has to be a misspelling in this article. It says gas, oil, one word. Consumption drops as industrial activity slows. The collapse in Chinese oil consumption is starting to reverberate across the global energy market, with sales of some crudes slowing to a crawl and benchmark prices in freefall. Which is why OPEC is panicking. Why shale oil producers are panicking. Sales of Latin American oil cargoes to China came to a halt last week, while sales of Western African crude, a traditional source for Chinese refineries, are also slower than usual, traders said. Chinese refineries are storing unsold petroleum products, such as gasoline and jet fuel, according to the executives, but stockpiles are growing every day, and some refineries may soon reach their storage limits. If that were to happen, they would have to cut the amount of crude they process. One executive said that the refinery runs were likely to be cut soon by 15 to 20%. There are signs that's already happening. Sinopec Group, the nation's biggest oil refiner in China, is in the process of reducing runs as its plants, refinery runs as its plants by an average of about 13 to 15%, and will review whether further cuts are needed February 9th, according to one of the people. The company declined to comment on its operations. As many as 18 independent oil refineries may be cutting how much they refine oil, or shutting completely as storage fills up, according to traders familiar with operations at the plants known as teapots. Interesting nickname. China has as many as 40 of these independent oil refineries all over the country, which are located primarily in the eastern region of Shandong and account for about a quarter of the nation's processing capacity. Beyond the headline print for Brent crude, every other indicator in the physical and derivatives market also points to a weakening market. So-called time spreads, which measure the price difference between contracts for delivery at different times, have collapsed, an indication that short-term demand is expected to remain weak. Let me also talk about this other article I just found about jet fuel. So this article came out today on oilprice.com, which is the best free resource for tracking the oil market and natural gas market if you're an investor or trader in oil and energy. And this article is by Irina Slav. Coronavirus pushes China jet fuel sales down 25%. Sales of jet fuel in China slumped by a quarter in the last week of January because of the coronavirus outbreak, an unnamed source from the oil industry told Reuters. The virus had a severe impact on the travel industry and air travel specifically, but the impact on total January sales of jet fuel was surprisingly moderate. Total jet fuel sales for the month of January were only down 0.2% from a year earlier, the source said. And I was just speaking with Chris Martinson on the phone about an hour ago, and we had an interesting conversation, and he was talking about how not only are the U.S. airline stocks up on all these travel bans and the stock markets are juiced, but the Asian airline companies, which you would think would be losing lots of business and have lots of problem, those stocks are up too. You can't make this stuff up, right? Just ridiculous. I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried. I mean, rationally, you would think with logic that the airline stocks would be having problems. They'd be in free fall, but these things are being propped up. These things are rallying. Some of these some of these airline companies are up, 2%, almost 2% today, when all the headlines are just brutal. However, as the outbreak continues spreading, its effect on travel is bound to become more palpable. Number of people infected. I don't believe that number. Did you guys see the Tencent article? There was an article from a Taiwan website, and the 50-cent China troll army is going to be upset I talked about this, but it's going all over Western Twitter right now, where supposedly Tencent, an employee or employees at Tencent, put on the website a much higher number of infected people for China's coronavirus and the death toll. I think they said over 150,000 people infected and over 24,000 people dead. And then the number was taken down, but people have the screenshots. So I hope that employee or employees at Tencent, I hope that they have their affairs in order and they're ready to go to prison. Because that's what happens when you make an accident like that in China. Bad things. No free speech there. Made the government look bad. I was telling Chris Martinson that on the phone. I was like, buddy, you're doing a great job with the research here and telling people what the truth and analysis and all this. But I was like, man, you're here in the West and you're making the Chinese government look bad because they view you as an enemy because you're telling the truth and it doesn't fit their narrative. So, 10-cent employee, not looking good for them. Even if it was an honest mistake, the Chinese government does not care. That is malicious rumors. And there's prison time normally with that, or worse. Okay, Chinese authorities discouraging travel by air or road in and out of the most affected regions, and have opposed a lockdown on the 11 million resident city of Wuhan, where the virus was first detected. Okay, recently I think also there's all these coronavirus stories coming out. There was a riot in Nanjing. What was it, Nanjing? Because there was someone from Wuhan who was infected there, and the citizens found out in Nanjing that there was someone from Wuhan who was lying and he was infected, and oh man, the police got involved. There's video of this too, supposedly. Jeffrey Landsberg from Commodore Research, and he just emailed me, shout out, friend of the show, sent me he's sending his paid subscribers a bunch of emails. You know, he should, now that I'm giving him free publicity on the show, he should start a free email list and mix in some free emails. I'll grow your email list, buddy, and I won't charge you. So I think there's going to be more pain in the oil and natural gas markets, and those are the only two markets right now to me that look honest. I mean, the gold market got pounded. The gold market's barely holding up above 50. It's right at 1560. The dollar index is above 98. Gonna have to wait a little bit longer for the dollar to collapse. China has too many problems right now to collapse the dollar immediately. Where can hedge funds get the money for leverage? Who will pay when they go bust? Probably the American taxpayer will subsidize some of it. The Federal Reserve will bail them out depending upon how large of a hedge fund. It depends how large and how systemically important. That's why long-term capital management got a bailout from the Wall Street banks and the Fed. The only Wall Street bank, I think, that didn't participate in long-term capital management bailout, wasn't it Bear Stearns? Hedge funds get the money for leverage in all types of different places. Hedge funds were borrowing in repo, and the private tri-party repo market, the large banks, well, fairly large banks like Bank of New York Mellon, were not probably doing enough research on the balance sheets of the borrowers, these hedge fund borrowers, not seeing how much leverage they were using in their trades. Anthony says we're living in bizarro world. I 100% agree. What is up is down, what is left is right, what is inside is out. And truth is treason in an empire of lies. This is truly the Twilight Zone or a Black Mirror episode. Ricky, if this was the United States, no one would be going to prison for a mistake like that. So if someone put up an accident on a website, there'd be screenshots and articles. Maybe someone would have to issue an apology. Maybe someone would get fired. But I don't think anyone would be going to prison or risking their lives for an accident like that. China is very, very different. Anything that makes the Chinese government look bad, you're risking prison time. Jeff, I have no idea what the exact death rate is, except that the Chinese government is lying. No idea. We may never know the truth. I mean, there's tons of videos going around Twitter from people with cell phones in Wuhan and elsewhere, but that's just, maybe you can make an educated guess or make a model. Another article out today from oilprice.com from, oh man, I'm going to screw up this name, Svetlana Paraskova. Hopefully that's okay. I do like her articles, though. I just can't pronounce her name. Saudis seek deeper output cuts to contain virus impact on oil demand. Saudi Arabia is pushing for deeper emergency production cuts of up to 1 million barrels per day as a technical panel of the OPEC Plus coalition is meeting in Vienna on Wednesday for a second day of discussions on how to react to the oil price slide and the coronavirus impact on oil demand. The technical panel this week can only make recommendations to the full ministerial meeting, but if the blah, 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 there's a bunch of technical stuff here, OPEC and its Russia-led allies could end up holding a meeting earlier than March 5th to 6th. If they wait until March 5th or 6th for an oil production cut, the oil price is probably going to crash a lot more. Saudi Arabia is signaling that it would be looking for additional cuts of at least 500,000 barrels per day and up to 1 million barrels per day to address the slumping oil demand in China, the world's top oil importer and biggest oil demand growth driver, delegates told Bloomberg. Russia, for its part, continues to play it cool and insists in public statements that it is ready to move up the meeting, but that thorough analysis of the market would be necessary to see if there is need of further cuts. Analysts scramble to quantify the demand loss from the virus outbreak, but all, including OPEC, agree that oil demand is currently dropping. Economic slowdown due to the coronavirus outbreak could cut global oil consumption by 300,000 barrels per day to 500,000 barrels per day for full 2020. I disagree with that number, but this is one estimate, according to the BP's chief financial officer. So that's a low-end estimate. That's a low-end estimate. The current demand drop for Chinese oil demand is dropped by, 3 million barrels per day? So you have people who are optimistic that that will return rather quickly. I don't see any evidence in any of the news stories that people are going to get back to work in China, that factories are going to get back to work, that people are going to be able to drive from one city to another very quick in the near future. I don't see any evidence of that yet. When I do see evidence of that with stories, I will let you guys know. And I will do another oil show about how oil is going to have a nice little pop, a nice little rebound. And then Keith McCullough and Hedgeye are going to talk about how their long oil call was right the whole time. I really respect Hedgeye and Keith McCullough, but it was only a pop for 2 or 3 weeks. So it was a nice little pop. I hope they got out. I hope they made a profit. Hopefully they hedged, hopefully they hedged and had some hedging protection in, or they got out of their profitable trades, because it was only a profitable long oil trade for maybe a couple of weeks. Now, obviously, I didn't see the coronavirus happening, but the global economy was getting weak, and before the coronavirus outbreak, China was dealing with a lot of economic problems. I was telling Chris Martinson about this on the phone. He was shocked when I told him about the bailout, how Hunan province was getting a bailout from China Construction Bank. Told him $300 billion, and he was like, what? I guess most people in the gold community don't know that, or don't want to know that. Doesn't fit their narrative. I mean, how can China collapse the dollar and go to a gold-backed yuan, or gold-backed petro yuan, or gold-backed crypto yuan, if China is doing bailouts at faster and faster paces, creating even more money in credit and repo now at the same levels as the U.S., but creating even more money in credit faster than the U.S. is, and doing even more different types of bailouts in the last 8 to 12 months than the U.S. is. And if you don't believe me, I put the research out there a few days ago. That video is demonetized. The China bailout video. I doubt you're going to find any research like that anywhere else. And that's because I was talking with hedge fund managers who were telling me about some different types of the bailout. So not only was I doing my own research work, China experts like Emma Mollman and Kyle Bass, I was getting information secondhand from Kyle Bass through Emma, and they were telling me about some of these bailouts. And so I went and looked up the articles. Anthony, from what I heard a couple days ago from one of my top China sources who's trapped in Wuhan, he's lived there for many years, has got me some really good information about the Chinese economy for a while now, way ahead of the curve, that there was 7 crematoriums built outside Wuhan. And from what I heard, the crematoriums were built before the hospitals. So you have Western media, which is kissing the Chinese government's butt. They are on board with the Chinese government's official narrative that China's doing an absolutely great job, preventing the virus from spreading. They're building the hospitals so quickly. They're doing an amazing job. Meanwhile, the truth is that they screwed things up on a level of Chernobyl, like the Soviet Union did with Chernobyl, or worse, except obviously I know that was a nuclear radiation problem with Chernobyl, and this is more of a virus, bioweapon, bio-accident. I mean, there's a lot of theories out there. It doesn't really matter how the virus started. What matters is the Chinese government covered it up and then screwed things up for about a month and allowed the virus to infect lots of people, and then allowed those people to travel all over the world. So you have the local government in Wuhan, the provincial government in Hubei, and the Central government in Beijing all making errors. And now you have people in different countries who had no contact with residents in China, with anyone from Wuhan, and they're getting infected in other countries now. Again, I have no idea on the real numbers. It's all speculation for now. Chris Martinson is doing an excellent job covering this. So is Winston and Matt. So Serpensa and Lawai86, the China YouTubers. Winston was the first China vlogger, I think. So do you agree that the oil market and the natural gas markets are the only two markets that seem to be pricing in any of the Chinese economic problems? But if OPEC intervenes, you're not going to have market discovery. You're not going to have that big crash in oil. Well, it's already crashed. I mean, it could get a lot worse, though. RJ, even if there is a coronavirus cure, it would still take, best case scenario, 6 months to manufacture enough cures. At best case scenario. And they'd have to skip a bunch of the human trials, so they'd have to skip a bunch of the testing phases to know if there's side effects or other problems. All those things along the way would be skipped. Christopher Martinson did an excellent interview a week or two ago, with a guy who put out a book about the 1918 global pandemic, the Spanish influenza. Definitely listen to that interview if you have about 45 minutes. Because they were talking about how if we do find a cure, then we have to either test it on humans, go through the normal trials of a drug, or they skip the steps, which is also dangerous. But given the circumstances, if things get bad enough, then they're almost definitely going to skip steps for testing. And then they have to manufacture enough of them. The mainstream financial media, mainstream media saying, moving the stocks up and claiming that the stock market is rising because they found positive news for a cure is ridiculous, because it's not reality. Best case scenario, if there is cures, at least 6 months to manufacture them, at least. And that's if nothing goes wrong. Jeff says, the scary thing is he sees 0 cases in Africa where all the Belt and Road building is going on. There has to be cases growing there. Probably those African governments don't have enough money to test. It requires a lot of resources to go out there and test. Also, there's provinces in China, Jeff, that supposedly have over 700 cases of infections, which I'm sure is a low number, and they have 0 people dead. So there's provinces in China, cities in China, on the official numbers that have over 700 people, 800 people. I'm sure it's growing now. That was like last night or the day before when I checked those numbers, where there was lots of people, the official Chinese government numbers, that were infected and no people were dead. And Hong Kong had, 15 people infected officially as of 24 hours ago. 15 people were infected and one of them was dead. Jeff, I already talked about the Tencent leak. You can go back on the replay and listen to it if you want. You know, if it was an honest mistake and someone accidentally put it on the website here in the US, the guy may lose his job. The company would issue an apology. Hopefully the guy or gal or employees who accidentally put that on the website would not lose their job here in the West. But in China, the repercussions for making an accident like that and putting it on the website and making the government look bad, you can be charged with malicious rumors and you're looking at 3 to 7 years prison time minimum, or worse. Okay, I'm looking through listener questions and comments, and then I'm going to wrap up this live stream show. I have a bunch of the OPEC articles and oil market articles about jet fuel demand falling, about Chinese oil demand falling, and yet the airline stocks are actually up. Miraculously. It's a miracle. It's a plunge protection team. Unicorns and rainbows. Unicorns don't poop. Miracle. I'm trying to inject a little bit of humor into here because it's a very serious, sad situation. When I was on the phone with Chris Martenson about an hour ago, I was telling him, look, man, you don't realize it, but now you're like, because all of his coronavirus videos are top 3 now on all the internet, and he's getting all these media appearances, and he's top 3 coronavirus videos on YouTube, that the Chinese government, he might not have been aware of this, he's now a main target for the Chinese government. Because him doing this research and analysis and going through China's data is making the Chinese government look bad. So they attacked his Wikipedia page, and I'm sure other stuff's happening now. Magic Marker says researchers say they are weeks away from a cure. The problem with that is, are they going to skip a bunch of the human testing and other hurdles that have to go through before they manufacture a cure? So what are going to be the side effects? So if they have a cure, are they going to skip all the safety trials for the side effects? And how long is it going to take to mass produce, mass manufacture the cure? Is it going to take 6 months? Is it going to take 12 months? Is it going to take 18 months? From what I've heard from experts, best case scenario, if they started tomorrow manufacturing the cure, it would take at least 6 months. Best case scenario, if nothing went wrong, if they skipped all the safety trials, it would take 6 months to manufacture enough if more people got infected. The virus seems convenient to stop the Hong Kong protests. I don't think China would want to do this to their own economy. They were having enough economic problems right now. I don't think that they would intentionally do it on their own This is my educated guess. China was having so many bailouts and economic problems prior to the coronavirus. I don't think that they would want to do this voluntarily. It was getting enormously difficult for the Chinese government and People's Bank of China and the Chinese banking regulators to put out all the different problems with credit and dollar-denominated debt and bailouts in the Chinese economy. Thank you for the super chat, Justin. Galactic Peace says, with the internet, we now have better info than our government. No, I think governments have good info. They just only tell the truth when they're convenient, and that's why I don't trust any governments at this point. I don't think anyone with any logic or common sense should not trust any government at this point. I don't think China would voluntarily hurt their economy this much to stop the Hong Kong protests. I mean, from what I hear, like, a lot of economic activity in China has ground to a halt. I mean, travel has ground to a halt. There's a lot of factories shut down. This is real-world problems. Now, China's probably still going to make the Q1 2020 GDP magically look like 6% growth. Oh, I got a super chat from Sean. Love your channel, found it yesterday. Oh, thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. And thank you very much to my now right around 250 Patreon account contributors, my dozen or so monthly PayPal contributors, who allow me to focus on content, research, information, analysis, and education like this. And then occasionally I do put a Patreon account contributor only audio podcast or written article behind the paywall. For $5 a month, I think it's a good deal. So you're helping me focus on content like this, and then occasionally I will do a bonus behind the paywall there. And I try to put the information behind the paywall. I try to make it exclusive. Okay, well, that's it for right now. I want to thank everyone for listening. And let me know in the comment section if you agree, if the oil market and the natural gas markets are the only markets that have any type of price discovery. And obviously you have OPEC, which is a cartel. But in spite of the cartel, in spite of the shale oil production being subsidized and uneconomic, it appears that the oil and natural gas markets are two of the only markets with actual price discovery right now, because you have all these headlines coming out about airlines shutting down flights, which means loss of revenue, which means loss of earnings, and these airline stocks anyway are going up, which is just even more ridiculous. Welcome to dystopia, right?